Okay. So we like to think that research, like hard science,
Yeah,
it's objective, right?
right.
But then you sent over this file, this drug.txt thing, and now,
Yeah.
I don't know, it's making me wonder about how objective things really are,
Mhm.
especially when it comes to like drugs and research. I mean, could some studies actually be influenced by like altered states of consciousness?
Yeah, it's wild, isn't it? Like, it's not something you think about every day, but it's a real thing.
It really is.
Yeah.
So let's dive into this a little bit, unpack this whole thing.
Let's do it.
So one of the things that really struck me was that uh, how different drugs, they can actually lead to different outcomes in research.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, for example, stimulants.
Right.
This drug.txt file mentions that they could make someone more likely to take risks, like in a study.
Oh.
But then on the flip side, you've got sedatives, which could make people, I don't know, like overly agreeable.
Oh, yeah.
And that would just completely skew the results.
Totally.
So, I mean, have you ever actually thought about it like that?
It makes sense though, right? Because the thing is, all these different drugs, they don't just like disappear in your system. They have a real impact on your brain, like they're messing with brain chemistry, literally changing how these chemicals work, the ones that control our thoughts, feelings, everything.
Yeah, that's true.
Like dopamine, for example. It's all about motivation and reward. And then there's serotonin, which is like the mood regulator. So
Yeah.
when you've got these altered states, it's going to impact the research. It has to.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Like, even just thinking about myself, if I've had my morning coffee, it's a stimulant, obviously.
Of course.
It changes my focus, like suddenly all those research papers, they don't seem as daunting.
Right.
But on a more serious note, I mean, this raises some pretty huge ethical questions, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. This research, it highlights some of the biggest ethical challenges in this entire field.
Like what?
Well, for starters, you've got consent. Can someone truly consent to being part of a study when they're under the influence of something that might be clouding their judgment?
Right.
It's a huge gray area. And then there's the whole issue of protecting the participants.
Yeah.
I mean, you're dealing with potential physical and psychological risks here. So how do you ensure their well-being? These are questions that researchers are constantly grappling with.
It's like walking a tightrope, ethically speaking. But the drug.txt file, it also brings up another interesting angle, the potential for, big profits and groundbreaking discoveries.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't just some theoretical debate. I mean, there's a ton of interest, not to mention money, pouring into this whole field of understanding how substances interact with our brains.
Like with big pharma, right?
Exactly. Think about it. If you're developing new drugs, you need to know how they're going to affect people.
Right.
I mean, down to the molecular level, how different substances, alone or combined with other things, are going to impact us.
Yeah.
And that research, it's essential.
And speaking of breakthroughs, I know we've talked before about like the research into psychedelics and how they could potentially help treat conditions like PTSD and depression.
Right. And that's huge right now.
It feels massive.
It is. I mean, there's so much potential there. It's a field that's just exploding. There's real hope that psychedelics, used responsibly, of course, and in controlled settings, could offer new solutions for people who haven't had much success with, more traditional treatments.
It's amazing. Really?
And it's not just psychedelics either. Even the legal cannabis industry, they're investing heavily in research. They want to understand the effects of their products on, well, everything.
Everything. Like what?
Sleep, creativity, you name it.
Wow. So it's not just like, those stereotypical images of scientists in lab coats doing questionable experiments, right?
Oh, not at all.
This has very real implications for everyone.
It does. And the crazy thing is, the document mentioned regulations, right? And those are important.
Of course.
But as technology keeps advancing, as we understand the brain better, I mean, are those lines going to get even blurrier?
Between what's ethical and,
Exactly, between enhancement and influence. What happens then? It's something to think about for sure.
No, absolutely. You've given us so much to think about today. Like, it's just these surprising ways that, drugs and research, they intersect, the ethical dilemmas, and then, of course, the potential for these, like, life-changing discoveries. So for anyone listening, if this deep dive has piqued your interest, I really encourage you to keep digging into this topic. It's a fascinating one.